Here we are at the glorious at a glance corporations. And actually this is kind of interesting, so I hope you enjoy it. We're going to look at what makes up corporations and what is their structure, and then what are the legalities of a corporation. We're going to encounter some new terminology. First, there's something called an alien corporation. And an alien corporation is a corporation from another country that is doing business in the United States or may have a facility in the United States. There's a business judgment rule, which is kind of interesting. Let me get the exact term for that because as I said, it's slightly interesting. It's a rule that immunizes corporate directors and officers from liability for decisions that result in corporation losses or damages, as long as the decision makers took reasonable steps of a reasonable human being. So that's called the business judgment rule, which kind of protects directors and officers as long as they work in a reasonable manner and make fair and just decisions. Commingle is when you combine resources and then combine them so much that you can't tell whose resources are whose. Piercing the corporate veil, which is an interesting term right here, talks about, you know how we always talk about shareholders are not liable for other damages that the corporation may incur or may cause. Well, piercing the corporate veil takes away that protection for shareholders, especially if you have a large block of shares owned by one individual that can really manipulate how the corporation is working. So if something unethical or something illegal is caused by that manipulation, then the shareholders may be responsible and held accountable. Preemptive rights is something that's used for preferred stocks. And a preferred stock, you have common stocks and you have preferred stocks. Preferred stocks have preemptive rights, which means they get the dividends first if there's money to be distributed. Tender offers is a kind of a polite thing, a way of saying a takeover. This is where a corporation wants to buy another corporation, and the board of directors or the executives are against it, and the corporation that wants to buy the corporation will go directly to the shareholders and offer to buy directly from there. And those are called tender offers. Proxy is when you allow somebody else to speak for you as a shareholder. You will give somebody the right to do a proxy vote. Securities would be equity securities such as stock, and those are ownership in the company. And a quorum it means you simply have to have enough members in attendance to meet the requirements for voting. So some interesting terminology. I think that pretty well covers it. Let's look at the nature of corporations. And as I think I said, mom and pops or proprietariships are the majority of the businesses in the United States. But the corporations make the most money and have the most profit, which is a little bit unusual. I think about 20% of businesses in the U.S. are corporation. So let's look at their nature. First of all, a corporation is recognized as a human being or as a person, and they have rights. Along with those rights, they also have taxation. So it's kind of a double-edged sword on that. The personnel for a corporation is usually the board of directors and the corporate officers. That's the inner circle that manages a corporation. Liability is limited to investment, which means whatever you invest in that company is what you could lose. You are not liable for the actual bills or accounts that the corporation would run up. Earning and taxation. Earnings can be used for dividends, disperse it out to the shareholders, or they can be retained in retained earnings for investment in the company. And usually so much has to be retained in the retained earnings before you can distribute a dividend. Many states dictate that so that there's always enough capital to keep the corporation running. Taxation, it's double taxation in a sense. The corporation gets taxed because it's an entity, and then when dividends or stocks are sold, that is also taxed. So the shareholders get taxed in a sense twice. I think it pans out all right. There are such things as holding companies, and holding companies are offshore companies that are situated in a location that has very low taxes. They're called holding companies. They are frowned on by many citizens of the United States, unless you're probably a shareholder, and then you're not frowning too deeply. There are torts and crimes that obviously a organization can commit. There's an agency relationship for torts. Shareholders can sue as a tort, and corporations can be fined, as well as the officers and the board of directors. So let's look at the classifications. Classifications, now this is kind of confusing. A domestic corporation is a corporation that is incorporated in the state that they are working in, or where they find their facilities. A foreign corporation is a corporation that is working in a state where they are not incorporated in. And to be able to operate in a state where you aren't incorporated in, you have to usually have a certificate from the state that you want to work within. And an alien corporation is a corporation from another country that's located in the United States. So you have public and private. Public is stocks is traded on the exchanges. A private corporation is held usually by a family, or possibly by a group of people that don't put the stock and don't want to open it up to the general public. A non-profit organization is an organization that is considered, it doesn't show a profit, it just works, to maintain itself, and then there are no profits that are really showed. It doesn't say that there isn't extra money, but a non-profit, and a non-profit is not taxable. A closely held or a close company is usually a company held closely by a family. Farms you may see as a closely held company. Small corporations, small manufacturing companies are usually closely held. And then an S corporation is the best of both worlds. You have the protection of a corporation and the for liabilities as far as that goes, but it is the taxes pass through and go to the owner only. A lot of very small businesses are S corporations, simply to protect the personal belongings from the liabilities of the company, and yet hold the privilege of the taxes passing through. So that's the nature of corporations. I see a question. So go take the question, and I will be up on corporate financing waiting for you. And here we go with corporate financing. I hope the question wasn't too bad. We're going to look at corporate financing. Two ways of doing this. You can use bonds, which is a debt, a true debt, or you can have stocks, which actually sells ownership in the company. And a debt, a bond, versus a stock. Bonds show up on the balance sheet and are used in ratios and looked at more closely by investors. So a bond has more of a negative effect sometimes on a corporation's financial statements, but on the other hand, a bond does not relinquish control or give more stocks out and liquidate the center of control. Whereas a stock shows up as ownership of a company in the retained or the equity section of the balance sheet, and does not become involved in some of the investment ratios that a corporation may have to handle. And stocks you don't have to pay back, right? I mean, you pay a dividend on them, but you don't have to pay back the original investment unless they're stocks that are callable. Whereas a bond will have a maturity date, it will have a face value. It's called an indenture, and it has conditions, just like any other payable. Types of stock that you can have are common and preferred. And common stocks usually have voting rights. You share in the earnings, and if there's any net assets still standing, if the company is dissolved, you will share in the net assets of the company. Preferred stocks are a little bit different. They usually don't have voting rights, but they do have what they call a cumulative effect, that if dividends aren't paid one year but are paid the next year, the preferred stock gets the first, receives the dividend first. And if they run out of money at that point, then your common stock may not get dividends at that time. And preferred stock receive dividends on a percentage, so that accumulates, and those have to be paid first. They can be participating as far as voting, but very seldom are they. And usually preferred stocks are redeemable, which means you can turn them back in and receive your money back from them. Sometimes you can also redeem them for common stock. I mean, there's all kinds of ways you can go with the redeemable stock. And venture capital is where investors will know it's a high risk, and they will put out the capital anyway, expecting a high return. And then there's private equity capital, which they buy the company and reorganize it for sale. These are raiders. They're usually raiders that come into a company, take out what they want, and then sell the rest. So we have another question. Boy, those questions are coming and going very quickly. So you take care of that. I'm going to go up and be waiting for you at corporate stakeholders. Corporate stakeholders. Welcome back, by the way. You have directors, and they have rights. You have officers and executives, and they have rights. And you should have shareholders. I guess I didn't put shareholders in here. Okay, so let's go with the directors. They're the ultimate, you've heard of the board of directors, they're the ultimate authority, and they are to protect shareholders' rights and make sure that the corporation officers and executives take care of things as they were supposed to, and keep the best interest of the company and shareholders in mind. They select and terminate officers. They determine the capital structure of the corporation. How is it going to be set up? They're going to be, and they're elected by shareholders eventually. First year, they're usually appointed until the shareholders can build up, and then they'll have a shareholder meeting, and your board of directors will be elected. They're usually to a one-year term, but usually they try to stagger those, so maybe there'll be the first year, 1/3 will be revoted, and then the second year, another third, and then the third year, another third, so they all rotate through. So there's some continuity in there. They can be removed if there's cause. If they do something illegal that is not good for the company, they can be removed. They are compensated in most cases. It kind of depends on the setup of the corporation. And when they meet, they must have a quorum before they can vote on anything. That means there has to be a certain percentage of the directors on hand to vote. They have rights. They have rights of participation within the managing of the company. They have rights of inspection, meaning they have rights to inspect any of the they have rights to look at financials, to look at any of the financial reports, and there's right of indemnification. The officers and executives carry out the bylaws of the company or the corporation. They act as agents, and remember we talked about that agency relationship. So they have a fiduciary relationship, which means they have a strong loyalty to the company, or they should have. They usually have contracts, and the contracts have fairly well laid out requirements, and they can be removed by the board without cause, which means that they don't have to give a cause. They can just terminate an officer or an executive. There are duties and liabilities. There are fiduciaries. It's a fiduciary relationship with both the directors and the executives and the officers. There's duty of care and loyalty. Duty of care comes under they need to act in good faith. They need to have the care of a prudent person, which means they aren't radical as far as what they want to do. They usually they're supposed to have the best interest of the company, and they are protected by the best judgment rule. But they have to be prudent and reasonable decisions that are made by them. On the loyalty side, there's faithfulness to the obligations, and the company comes before personal interests, and that's one they seem to have a difficult time with. And they must always disclose conflicts of interest. If they're sitting on two boards, if there's a personal interest and they shouldn't be voting on something. So that kind of wraps up the top half here. We do have another question, and right here, and we will then take up part 2 for Friday, and part 2 is going to involve the formation, mergers, and termination of the corporation. So thank you for listening. I'll see you in class Wednesday.